Greetings, greenhouse people. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and this episode of the Tech on Demand podcast, brought to you by GrowerTalks, is a special presentation from the 2026 Darwin Perennials Day event in the Gardens at Ball in West Chicago, Illinois. Darwin Perennials Day is a yearly event held each June to showcase perennial plants, breeding innovations, a huge range of suppliers, and of course the growers who produce and sell perennial crops. For many years, the event has included educational sessions, panel discussions, and talks by perennial experts. This year, one of the panels was moderated by GrowerTalks editor Jen Zurko, with 3 expert panelists focused on Echinacea production. Echinacea Best Practices for Spring, Summer, and Fall featured Ball Seed Culture Research Manager Nathan Jahnke, Darwin Perennials Product Representative Chris Fifo, and Stokes, the Seedling Business Manager at Swift Greenhouses in Iowa. I think you'll find this discussion interesting and packed with information to help you and your team level up your Echinacea production. I will hand the golden TOD microphone over to my friend Jen Zurko and let her take it away. Echinacea Best Practices for Spring, Summer, and Fall.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen Zurko. I'm editor of GrowerTalks magazine, and I am the moderator for this delightful panel today in this very rainy weather on Darwin Day. And today our panel is Echinacea Best Practices for Spring, Summer, and Fall. Obviously, Echinacea is becoming quite popular, especially among consumers. I visited 4 garden centers in over 2 days during Mother's Day weekend, and the Echinacea was flying off the racks, especially, we know there's a couple perennial growers here today, and their stuff was very popular. Echinacea was being asked for by name. And I know that Darwin has spent a lot of resources and time on breeding Echinacea, so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So our esteemed panelists, from my right to left, is Dr. Nathan Jahnke. He is the Culture Research Manager for Ball Horticultural Company. In the middle, we have Chris Fifo, Product Representative for Darwin Perennials. And lastly but not leastly, Stokes, who is the Seedling Business Manager for Swift Greenhouses in Iowa. I have a couple prepared questions for all of them. They're all going to kind of take a different stage of Echinacea production. But if you have any questions, please shout out, raise your hand. I'll come and you can ask them any questions during the process. Okay? So we're going to start with Nathan first. He's going to kind of take over the beginning stages of Echinacea production. So my first question for you, Dr. Jahnke, is what are the first things growers should do when receiving their tissue culture perennials?
So we've actually done quite a bit of research on tissue culture, especially Echinacea, because it's one of the main crops for Darwin Perennials. And tissue culture is sort of that newer product form, right? We're very familiar with seed, we're very familiar with cuttings, but TC is like this thing that comes in a plastic box with jello on the bottom of it. And it's like, how is plants growing in these, right? So it's a very different plant right away. And that's primarily because the plant has a lot of humidity in there. And so what we need to do is build a cuticle on the leaf surface so it resists water coming out of the leaf, and build roots and get that photosystem going for the plant, because we basically babied it in a jar for a while, right? But once it get past that point, it's basically like any other plant. So tissue culture is really simple once you get past the acclimation point. But a few key things to look at for tissue culture when you get it into your greenhouse. First off, just like you would for your cuttings, is looking for any decay or breakdown or fungal or bacterial growth within the container. Because if you start out with that, you could see losses later on after sticking that product, right? Contamination is what we call that inside the flask. And sometimes if there's no breakdown, if everything's healthy inside there, contamination may not really be an issue. Sometimes there's just saprophytic fungi or something that's growing inside the container. So really just look, if the plant looks healthy, you can probably still stick it. And then if you have concerns, you can contact one of us, send it into a lab or something. Another thing to look at for tissue culture is a healthy, young, and robust area of the crown where the roots are coming out. If you have a really woody tissue or a lot of callus on the bottom of that TC plantlet, it's probably a little bit on the old side, or they've used too many hormones to get the roots going. And those plants are going to struggle to get roots out of that callus, because roots come from the vascular system, the xylem of the plant. And that callus is really just there to break apart the tissue so roots can penetrate out. So if there's too much of that, you're going to really struggle rooting those after taking them out of the TC flask.
So what about liners? What are the general steps so if you grow from liners instead of tissue culture, what are the general steps when they arrive at your greenhouse?
Very similar process, and Hans and Chris, feel free to step in here at any time. But looking for a breakdown, right? If you have diseased plants coming in, you're going to want to ask the supplier about that. But also, you may be getting some dormant material, right? So understanding that this product may be still regrowing after a little bit, and you got to give it some time, give it those warm temperatures to make sure the crown is healthy and green after a little while is two differences compared to buying non-dormant or dormant liners. And then preparing your substrate properly for transplant, right? We all like to get ahead of ourselves and plan and prepare for transplanting, but if you fill those pots too early, it's going to dry out. And if you're using a peat-based substrate, which most of us are, right, it produces a lot of oils, and it can become hydrophobic or resisting water. So if you fill your pots too early and they dry out, and then you transplant and try and water in, it's not going to water, and it's not going to wet up properly, and you'll get dry pockets throughout the container, and then you're not going to get good root growth afterwards.
One thing that we try to do when TC comes into the greenhouse is we inspect the packages, make sure the boxes aren't turned over, make sure the media is not covering the echinaceas. Also check temperature. Was it 100 degrees in the box? How is that going to affect the TC as it roots out? And then as we mist our crops, we'll tent them. As we take them from 100% humidity down to 80% humidity, we want to gradually bring those down so that when the roots come out, they're reaching for that moisture and not just going from 100% humidity all the way to 40% humidity and dying. So that's a big thing I watch for as we get TC in and from the labs.
Yeah, it's just like a cutting, right? You don't want your cuttings to wilt and fall over, but your TC is going to be very prone to wilting right away. But it's the same mindset of backing off on that misting or the VPD. If you're using that in your greenhouse, back that off slowly so the plant can build up resilience to the drier climate.
But one thing you need to keep in mind is TC is not for everybody. It's more of a high-tech type of propagation method. It is the newest way, and really the technology is kind of in its infancy still. We're still learning a lot about supply chain, about how to properly produce the best quality TC so customers can have the best success. And so it's not going to be for everybody. If you're already propagating your own unrooted cuttings, this might be something to look at for the future. But when it comes to the acclimation stage, like Nathan said, it's understanding where these are coming from. They're coming from a laboratory. And so they've never seen the light of day. They've never seen air before. And so from the moment you open those vessels, you have to be very aware of the surrounding environment. Any blast of low humidity air, any direct sunlight can very quickly suck the life out of those little plantlets and really, decrease your chances of success. And so it's going to be more of a specialized type of propagation. Majority of you are probably going to go with more of a liner stage where Swift or other liner suppliers are going to supply those liners to the market. But then Nathan said on the finish side, you're going to have basically two types of liners you can get in. You can get actively growing, or you can get the dormant liners. And when it comes to this, you need to understand what your expectations are, where your supplier is and what kind of product that they do supply. Swift, in particular, primarily going to be that overwintered and that dormant liner early in the season. Many other suppliers are going to provide an actively growing liner. So that's opening the communication with your ball sales rep or with that supplier and understanding what you will be receiving because that's going to affect how you're going to grow those from the beginning.
So I guess the question is, how many grow active echinaceas versus dormant? Echinacea active, raise your hand. Okay, anybody dormant or cold treated or vernalized? Yep, you do both. Okay, awesome.
Okay, so now this question, now we're going to Hans. So now the TC and liners have come to your greenhouse as a grower. What is the best way to force your perennials to meet sales windows?
Right. Forcing perennials, I like to pick on Nora a little bit. I'm not going to ask you to speak or anything, but Nora, if you know her, ask her for her cookie recipe. I think of growing echinaceas like baking cookies. She's got a secret ingredient in her cookies, and I won't spill the beans, but growing these, you get them in a box, they ship to you, they're dormant, they've been frozen, cold treated. How do I bake these echinaceas to perform to the best of their ability? I would follow a recipe. I would follow a track record of how do we do it at Swift Greenhouses to have reliable success every year. The first is inspect the box. Make sure that they look good. If they're soft, the crowns are rotted, the roots are black and dead, well, you need to call me or call Scott and say, hey, look, this isn't what I was expecting in the box. Second, after you get the product, we talked about media. We ought to make sure the media is correct. So when we plant them up into a container, we're not planting them into really fine peat moss. They have to have good porous soil. And then third, you got to give them some heat. Often I see many individuals grab vernalized plugs, throw them outside and say, hey, well, Mother Nature, as you see outside, they're going to grow. They're going to take off and they're going to finish for us. Well, reality is the echinaceas are just barely blooming now. And if you want to sell these April 1 or April 15th, or Mother's Day, we really need to put some heat onto that crop and grow them right. So first week, I would target 68 degrees, day and night, give them really hot temps. If you don't have that room, leave them in the plug tray for a day or two, just to get the heat on that plug really strong and even. And then after you grow it, you can eventually, as it leafs out and starts to flush, you can bring the temperature down. But I think that first week is very critical. That second week is very critical to keep it 65 and above. Again, my recommendation, 68 plus. I see more success with that. But as you go down to like 50 or 60, you're going to have some issues that first and second week. So you really need it hot. So,
yeah, cold and wet is not a good combination. When you're trying to make a plant grow, it's going to be a given you're going to have issues. And now if you are planting those early in spring, like you said, especially starting with that dormant plug, you want to make sure, we call it forcing perennials for a reason, because we want to force them and make them know it's time to wake up. And that's where those warm temperatures to come into play. And that's not just air temperature. We need to be aware of our soil temperature as well, where those roots are, where that crown is. That's what's going to encourage them to grow. And so if you're coming into an empty greenhouse in the springtime, maybe a cold frame where you do have the opportunity to heat, but it's been cold for the winter, maybe that ground is super cold still too. And if we're putting our pots directly on the ground, that ground is going to suck the heat out of that pot as well. And so anything you could put underneath those just to raise them up a little bit is going to encourage that warm air through the bottom and make it easier to keep that soil warm. At Swift, we used to use 288 plug trays, turn old plug trays upside down. I've seen all kinds of resources out there, bulb crates, any kinds of trays, anything you think of, get that pot up off the ground is going to help you get them around faster.
And then the other step that I forgot to mention as we talk about heat, you look at the light conditions. When do they naturally bloom? What photo period are they requiring to bloom? So I've got on my phone, I took some pictures this spring, April 1, of blooming artisan orange blooming in April 1, shipping to our customers. How did we get it to flower that early? You need long day lighting. You need day extension or night interruption to get these things out of that dormancy with the temperature to get that cookie just to bake just right. Because again, we can crank it up to 500 degrees and get a nice cookie in 2 minutes, but in reality, that slow baking process with a night interruption or long day lighting will make that complete and full.
I can attest that Nora's cookies are delicious. Maybe she'll bake you some if you're nice to her and ask nicely. Okay, so we talked about temperature and lighting. Is there anything, other considerations that growers need to think about when they're getting their TC or plugs or liners?
I would just watch for disease. I think disease is very common and then again, the variability of a high tunnel, for example. If you're going to go from 70 degrees in the day and down to 40 degrees at night, you're going to have issues with disease and bacteria and botrytis in the crown. So protect that growing point. You really need to watch those. Broad spectrum fungicides work great on these guys. There's not one chemical class that I would recommend over another, but be aware of that conditions.
Okay. If anyone has their hand up, you guys tell me. I'm trying to sit down so people
Yeah,
can
if
see.
you have questions, feel
Yeah.
free to ask.
Yeah. We moved this to a smaller tent instead of lunch tent this year, just so we could have better interaction. So Jen's got the microphone to pass on. We meant this to be interactive and a small group here, so everybody here is growing Echinacea and would love to have Echinacea in flower for Mother's Day, right? Jen said she was out at the garden centers and seeing Echinacea flying off the shelves. Well, you're going to fly at a certain rate if you're only green. You're going to fly a lot faster if you have the color on them. And forcing Echinacea for Mother's Day is very easy to do. A few years ago when COVID was here, we all remember that. Darwin Perennials, we couldn't have our Darwin Perennials Day. We had Darwin Perennials University throughout the summer. And we have all these videos archived still, and there was a couple great videos on there on forcing Echinacea for Mother's Day, both sombreros and the seed Echinacea. And so you can Google that and find that on YouTube, and you'll find the exact recipes for starting roughly week 5 with the plugs, transplant, give them the warm temperatures, Hans said. For 5 weeks, you give them that long day lighting, which there's nothing special about long day lighting. It's just a light bulb. It's not fancy HID lights, LED lights, anything like that. It's not big grow lights. It could be as simple as a table lamp and turning it on from 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. There are several different types of lights available out there now. They've got Philips flowering lamps is probably some of the best for forcing flowers these days. But you transplant a plug for 5 to 6 weeks. You give it night interruption lighting. By that time, that plant is going to set flower. It's going to have bud set, and at that time, you can turn that lighting off. Once they've started to flower, they're going to continue to go, so you don't need to run lights anymore. And by running that then, for the next 5 weeks, you're going to have Echinacea flowering for Mother's Day. Again, maintaining those temperatures like Hans said.
Well, and you may be wondering, like, how does that fit within the rest of your production, right? But there are a lot of crops, especially annuals, all of our petunias and calibrachoa that are facultative long day plants too. And so that long day lighting will actually improve and hasten their flowering as well.
Yeah, I always suggest like a begonia house. You know, if you have a hot begonia house where you're growing seed begonias that you need that heat to fill out that basket for Mother's Day, start them in there, get them started, get them going. And again, you know, a little bit of time in the plug tray from ours or others. I mean, most are getting them in a bigger bulked mature plug. They're not typically small 288 seedlings that I grow active, but again, you know, that heat will help them root out and leaf out really well.
Oh, wait, hold on. I'm coming. Wait, who has a question? Okay, hold on. Okay.
What about fertilization?
I think the first, the first week I don't fertilize. I want to get that heat on that crop. Again, the root ball is going to stay put. But after they root out and start going into the media, I'm checking, right? I'll start with just a basic calcium CalMag feed, the 15-215, 100 parts, 150 parts, somewhere in there. But as it gets to week 3, week 4, it's fully rooted to the bottom of your container, gallon or 6-inch. Then I'm going to jump it up to a 17-217, a little bit more ammonia, get those leaves to expand and broaden out. You know, the more light, the more ammonia you can use. But obviously, like today, don't put that high ammonia feed on it because you're going to burn the roots and that fertilizer will sit.
So Echinacea in general are very heavy feeders. Not necessary to begin with. You want to have a good starter charge or something for them to get going and get those roots into the media to begin with. Are you using liquid feed or controlled release fertilizers? Both? Okay.
She said both.
And so I do like the concept of controlled release fertilizers, especially for something like Echinacea that are the heavy feeders. I generally like going with more of a medium rate, but then supplementing with liquid feed further on. And so we've got the fertilizer to begin with, and you know, controlled release is really uncontrolled release because it's so dependent on moisture and temperature that you really don't have control on the release rate. And that's why I like the medium rate, and we can apply liquid as necessary. But as those Echinacea get going, and after that first 5 to 6 weeks, we start setting bud. And like, especially with the sombreros and with the seed Echinacea, like powwows and artisans, once they start developing that flower, they're going to start drawing more nutrients from the foliage. And that's when we need to be very aware and inspecting our crop and looking for signs of deficiencies. My first indication is always the lower leaves. Are we getting any purpling on the lower leaves? Are we seeing any reddening or something like that? that is our indication that we are running lean on the nutrients, and primarily we need more phosphorus. And I'm a firm believer in using 20-10-20 on Echinacea after they've set bud, after we're developing that flower, because one thing, if we're going to be drawing those nutrients from that older foliage, if we apply that 20-10-20 too early, we're going to get more stretch because we don't have the flower buds for those nutrients to go into. But after it's set, we're going to get deeper green foliage. We're going to keep that purpling away. I don't know if anybody's ever seen like crinkling and hard leaves in Echinacea. Again, 20-10-20 fertilizer is going to give you this broad, soft green, deep green foliage. But once we're flowering, we're not going to stretch either. And so if we apply what some would consider excessive amounts of phosphorus in that fertilizer, that single flower stem is then going to branch, and you're going to increase your flower count on your Echinacea by going heavy feed. A few years ago, when we introduced the Double Scoop Deluxe collection, the Watermelon Deluxe in particular, out in Elburn, where we're growing for cultivates. And once these plants came into flower, and it was about this time of year, they're setting up that first bud. And all I was seeing was a single flower stem coming up. And I was getting really worried that, hey, this is the focus point of our cultivate booth. I was kind of freaking out. And so I had the growers switch to 250 parts per million, 20-10-20, twice a week. And under full sun conditions by cultivate, we had so many flowers, and every single pot was spot on uniform. So I'm a firm believer, just from my own experience, in using those fertilizers, and that does help give you that beautiful green foliage and increase your flower count.
I was going to take a step back too, of like around the time of transplant, like you were talking about with fertilizer, especially if you're working with dormant liners, water management in addition to the EC or amount of fertilizer you're putting on is very important, because you could around those times either jack up the EC too high and get burned, or you're too wet, and then you can run into boron and calcium deficiencies, which are going to cause leaf deformation and bud deformation. So making sure you've got those micros in addition to your water management within the container is going to make sure you have plants that look like they're supposed to, instead of being crinkled and deformed.
Yeah, you got to make sure you're taking up all those nutrients. So again, always keep an eye on the root system. Always pop a plant out and just see how the roots are doing. Make sure we get some healthy white roots there. And with any plants, avoid the extremes. If you keep them at a 5, too wet for too long, if you wilt them down too often, go from that wilt to a saturation, you're just going to increase your problems. You know, keep your moisture right in the middle, and that's the number one thing we do that affects our plants, is the watering, because we're doing that every day. But you shouldn't be doing it every day. And sometimes if you've got an assistant or something, or someone else out there doing your watering for you, sometimes they don't feel like they're working unless they're watering. Like, oh, they sent me out here to water. Well, maybe they don't need water. But sometimes you feel like, well, I'm not actually doing anything if I'm not watering. More of that is walking through your crop and looking at it and thinking about it and understanding, do I really need to be watered right now? Or is this just the time of day that I come through and check and, oh, that might be dry by this afternoon. I better water it now to be careful.
Yeah, instead of walking around with a hose maybe about to water, maybe walk around about picking up your pots. Because then you determine that feel of when should I water instead of I'm ready to water.
Yeah, it's so easy. Week 5, week 6, week 7 to overwater. I mean, again, it's winter, you know.
Okay, so temperature is good, lighting's good, fertilizer's perfect. So Chris, what happens now as you're finishing your crop? What else do you need to do before it ships out?
Well, I mean, the main thing I think is, what problems can we run into? Where have I screwed up Echinacea in the past? You know, nutrients is number one. You know, that's the number one thing to always look at, and always be aware when you're fertilizing, we're always fertilizing by light intensity. We're not doing anything to the crop on a day like today, even if it's starting to get dry. We don't want to put fertilizers on there. Another thing that you might think about, especially if we're growing in like a poly greenhouse or something like that, is, do I need PGRs? Oh, they're starting to look a little bit tall. What kind of PGRs do I need to apply? And with Echinacea, we need to be careful, because we can delay flowering. We can severely stunt Echinacea. We can give them that hard, crinkled leaves. by using something like a bonsai or a Sumagic spray. Those are very strong PGRs. B9 can be very useful, but you can't apply B9 after you're showing color on the flowers because you're going to burn your flowers and lose some of the color. So one thing to think about is that size. First thing you want to do is always manage your moisture. That's going to be number one, making sure we've got highest light intensity possible. Later in the season, I generally do see the best quality grown outdoors, but obviously you're going to have this variable. I've always grown undercover myself, and so you're always looking at a little bit decreased light intensity going through a poly greenhouse. And so that's where a little bit of a PGR might come in handy, but I always recommend sticking with the lower rate and apply multiple times if necessary. B9, like I said, is a good soft one to use before coloration. Sumagic can be used at lower rates as a spray to help tone those crops. What other problems can we run into? Generally we don't see a lot of leaf spots or botrytis or things like that when we're grown properly, not at that time of year. Later in the season, there is a, what do you call it, phytoplasma. There's a disease called aster yellows, and that can deform Echinacea flowers, and it's really a systemic infection then that they cannot come out of it. So it's something to always be aware of in your Echinacea crop in the summertime, and it's spread by leafhoppers. And so that's where in general, throughout nurseries, every greenhouse, etc., you always want to have sticky cards out there. You always want to monitor your pests because leafhoppers in particular can affect your Echinacea and cause permanent problems to the point where you'd be discarding them.
Are there any other troubleshooting issues that people should think about? I mean, we mentioned disease. You just talked about some insect. Anything else that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, one thing I see sometimes, not often, when you're forcing that Echinacea, if you get a bloomer early, take it out. Again, it's coming out of dormancy. Let's say there's a bud that was stuck there somehow in the fall production. Take it out, force it up through it. It'll leaf out. It'll branch out. So I've seen Bill Calkins talk about that a few times on his newsletters out to everybody. Again, when you're giving it that long days and that heat, sometimes you'll see an early bud week, 2 weeks into crop cycle, pull that bud off and just pitch it out.
Yeah, great point. We do see that premature flowering. If you do have that and you let it go, you'll tend to just get one really tall flower stalk. And so especially if you're getting actively growing liners. And so with the sombreros, they do not require overwintering. They do not require short day treatment like we recommend with the seed varieties, but sometimes you can buy an aligner and you'll see some premature budding. Always pinch those initial buds out, and ideally, if you can, for the first 2 weeks, pinch any buds out. That's going to encourage better branching and a higher flower count for you. When it does come to, I mentioned that short day treatment. There's a difference between the seed Echinacea, like the powwows and the artisans, versus the sombreros. When you're buying a seedling plug in the springtime and you want to do a first year flower program with the seedling Echinacea, you have to be sure you're getting a short day treated plug, a black cloth plug. And that's how they'll be listed on WebTrack. If you're looking for these, your sales rep will know what that black cloth treatment is, but you have to get a short day treated seedling Echinacea in the springtime to get a really good flower show. Otherwise, all you're going to get is like a single flower coming up.
Yeah, stick in a pot, right?
Stick in a pot.
Oh boy,
Yes.
we don't want that.
Can we use, I haven't done this, but have you guys used Configure or anything to alleviate the stick in the pot, or maybe talk about your experience with
I've
Configure?
trialed it a little bit in the summer production as we grow our 288s before we transplant them into 50 plugs and then vernalize them. But for you guys, I just wouldn't use it. It causes the plant to do a lot of weird things.
Yeah, Configure is a branching agent. And what it will do is create all kinds of basal branches on that. And I've seen a lot of uses of Configure. The place where I like it the best is in the liner stage. That is going to give you the best results as far as getting the basal branching. And the ultimate goal is to increase the flower count. And more branches coming up is going to increase your flower count. Some growers I've seen apply it in finished containers, think, okay, I can get better branches in finished, but it ends up with a much less uniform crop. Configure in any PGR for that matter is stressful on the plant. And that's how it's, kind of creating what it does. And configure can affect rooting as well. And so if we're in a container, we're going to stress that plant, we're going to affect rooting. And ultimately, it's going to give you a less uniform crop. And so I like it applied in liner stage. If you're producing your own liners, apply it roughly 5-6 weeks after getting that liner going, but not less than 2 weeks before transplant. And that way they'll recover from that stress and come out of it much better. But I do see good results with the use of configure in the young plant stage.
Definitely do trials if you're even consider using that or trying to use PGRs to enhance branching. We've done a lot of research on that here, and we've made a lot of plants look terrible. So trial before you're putting it across the whole production block.
Don't just say, Chris told me to do this. Now I screwed up my crop.
Thanks for the shout out for Bill's newsletter, Hans. That's good. So this might be a dumb journalist question who's never grown anything in a greenhouse, but is there anything different you do if you want the Echinacea for fall? Because I know a lot of growers and retailers have been really pushing Echinacea for fall production.
I mean, I think kind of what Chris talked about. If it's short day treated, then it'll work in that fall program. I mean, again, most often what we're doing at Swifts isn't for that, but there are growers out there that do produce a Echinacea that, it's treated that way. It's been bulked. It's short day treated for 6-7 weeks. Lo and behold, you can plant it in a gallon and finish it out for fall sales.
Nora, Mike, Kevin, we have, some suppliers that sell short day treated Echinacea. Yeah, all the artisans. Yeah.
Why don't you go back there? All the artisans. Is that what they said? So is it better with the seed varieties than seed liner?
Only the seed varieties need to have that short day treatment.
Oh, I see.
Your vegetative do not, and we actually recommend with sombreros that they are not short day treated. Grow them straight through from long days. And so with that, sombreros are very strongly first year flowering. And if everybody should be familiar with our first year flowering tool, it's going to give you very accurate scheduling for your region on how to get Echinacea for fall. Obviously a perfect plant for fall, super easy to grow. That's the main thing. The biggest problem you're going to have is nutrition. Always keep an eye on that nutrition. But Echinacea sombreros for fall are super easy to schedule. One thing just to keep in mind is the later we get into the summertime, since Echinacea are a long day crop, anytime past this next week, our days are going to start getting shorter. So each progressive week later that we transplant them, it's going to take even longer to finish. So past like the middle of July transplant, we may not come into full color before the days get too short to really keep them in flower. So that's something to keep in mind. It's usually between weeks 24 and 27 that we're transplanting Echinacea for fall sales. But use that first year flowering tool. It's a great resource. We are constantly keeping that updated with all the latest and greatest new introductions that we've got from Darwin.
So that's a good segue. I was going to ask about first year flowering. And if you're used to overwintering Echinacea and you're transitioning to the first year flowering, like what do you tell growers that they, how do they change their production procedures?
How would you change that, Hans?
I mean, again, you have to look at your scheduling. You have to look at the time that you have to switch over. First year flowering, obviously, looking at some of the ball sheets that you guys have, that takes longer time. Most of our vernalized plugs, they're going to be in flower in springtime, about 10 to 14 weeks. So you're going to have to add at least 6 to 7 weeks on top of that production schedule to make them finish in time. So that's kind of my thought on that, is just making sure you have enough time to get the window in right.
Yeah, it's going to take a little bit more time to get them come out of dormancy. But it's a given. Anybody who does a fall plant or does a vernalized liner, you're getting a higher flower count that first year with the vernalized liner. Sombreros do pretty darn good first year flower, but if you have the opportunity to do that over winter, I think you always end up with a better plant. And plus, if you're fall planting your perennial program, come springtime, you got all this annual material coming in, your perennials are already taken care of. You don't have to worry about it getting mixed up, for one thing.
Yeah, you save labor and you just heat them up and off you go.
Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? Anyone? Questions, comments, opinions? Give your opinions to yourself. No, I'm just kidding. You guys have any other things that we didn't touch on? Something that is important that we missed?
Well, the biggest message I got for you guys is use your resources. You've got a tremendous amount of resources available through your ball sales rep, through the ball tech team, through your Darwin Perennials representatives and through your suppliers. Hans is always willing to answer questions. Just reach out, drop us emails, give us a call. There's no reason that, I'm starting to have some problems with my Echinacea. There's no reason it should get to the point where it's unrecoverable. If you start seeing something that you're not quite sure about, reach out, use the information available to you, and everybody's always available to help you have success with your crops.
Thank you for braving the weather. I know the Darwin folks who've worked very, very hard for weeks and weeks and weeks to prepare for this event appreciate it very much, and we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.